If We Could Be Angels by Larry B. Litton Jr. The fluorescent light above Brent flickered just once, a small, stuttering tremble, but it was enough to make him look up. It buzzed annoyingly, the way old bulbs do when they're about to give out. The whole office had that hum to it, sterile and soft and vaguely electrical, like a machine breathing. Brent sat across from his boss, a man named Daryl Cummings, who wore pressed shirts and smiled like it was forced. The corner of Daryl's office held a sad potted plant with brown tips, and on the wall hung a cheap canvas print of sailboats in blue water. There were pictures on his desk of Daryl and his family hiking along the Great Wall of China and snorkeling along the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. The stock price of the company had rallied hard for the past year, and Daryl had the pictures to prove it. Brent's hands were folded in his lap, clenched tighter than he realized. He wore a button-down cotton shirt with the collar slightly askew. He hadn't eaten lunch. He had known something was off when the calendar invite said HR matter. Daryl spoke with a sort of cadence people use when they're trying to make really bad news sound not all that bad. It's not personal, Brent. This is about efficiency, about adaptability. Brent said nothing. Daryl went on. You've done great work, solid work, but the landscape is changing. AI is handling most of what your department used to do, and it's faster, it makes fewer errors. That's just the nature of the world now. Brent looked at the desk between them, and a single folder sat there. His name was on a label, like a headstone. He wondered how much Daryl's stock price would go up once Brent's entire department was eliminated. 6 years, Brent said finally. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I trained the system we're using now. Do you realize that? Daryl shifted a bit uncomfortably. I do, and we appreciate it. Brent didn't answer. He thought of his daughter Emmy, not even 3 years old, with tangled hair and chipped fingernail polish. Just this morning, she had handed him a drawing of a stick figure with a big smile, and she said, "That's you, Daddy, fishing." She didn't know what sadness was yet, or bills, or fear. She believed in pancakes on Saturdays, and bedtime stories, and daddies who always came home with a paycheck and groceries. I've got rent, Brent said. I've got a car. We're also trying to save money to buy a house. Daryl's face took on a look of practiced sympathy. There's a severance package and outplacement support. We'll be able to help you where we can. The word severance hung there like a bad smell. Brent stood slowly. His knees ached. He was 34, but he suddenly felt older, like the years had stacked up on his back when he wasn't looking. He had once believed in things, in hard work, in fairness. He believed in the idea that if you kept your head down and gave it your best, you could accomplish anything. But now he wasn't quite so sure. The world had changed, and not for the better. He looked out the window behind Daryl's desk, and the parking lot stretched flat and gray under a wan sun, the kind that gave no warmth. Is that all? Brent asked. Daryl nodded. Take the afternoon off. Take the week. Brent picked up the folder, and it felt heavier than it should have. On the elevator ride down, the silence was loud. His reflection in the brushed metal walls looked blurred, like a man he barely recognized. In the lobby, the receptionist, a girl named Holly who wore bright lipstick and never remembered his name, said, "Have a good one, Barry." He didn't even bother to correct her. Outside, the wind cut through his coat. The sky was steel-colored and low, and the smell of coming rain hung in the air. Brent climbed into the old Toyota and he just sat there. He felt sick to his stomach. He stared through the windshield and he tried to think. He tried to line up the facts like ducks in a row, but they flapped away in his mind. Rent was due in 12 days. The severance they offered him was a pittance, really. Enough money to last just a few months. His wife, Caroline, had been out with the realtor looking for houses. They had finally found one near Katy, a fixer-upper that barely fit into their price range. He wasn't sure he could take the look of disappointment that would surely be in her eyes when he broke this news to her. Brent laid his head back against the seat. There was a time when he believed he could work his way up into the corner office. He wanted to be the guy who could afford to take his wife and daughter to the Great Wall of China and snorkel the Great Barrier Reef. Now he began to wonder whether he'd be the guy who could afford to buy groceries in the months ahead. He closed his eyes and he saw Emmy's drawing again. Him, smiling and fishing. The river. That's where he'd go. He needed somewhere quiet and peaceful just to sit, to think. He turned the key to the ignition and the car sputtered, then caught. And the heater blew cold for the first few minutes, then wheezed out something lukewarm. He headed south toward the Brazos, where the trees bent low over the water like old men and where time moved slower. He didn't know why. He just needed to remember something good and pure. Maybe the world as it used to be, or maybe the world as it could still be. The doctor's office smelled like lemon-scented ammonia and quiet despair. It was the kind of quiet that made you aware of every small noise. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the soft rustle of a nurse's sneakers down the hall, the turning of magazine pages by nervous patients waiting for their test results. Harlan Wade sat stiff in a vinyl chair that stuck to the back of his arms. The fabric of his old pearl snap shirt, clean but faded, was bunched at the elbows. His jeans had a rip at one knee, a scar of labor and stubbornness. He looked down at his boots. They were dusty and cracked and had stepped through more of Texas than most men ever would. Across from him, the doctor, a young fellow named Anwar, who always wore bow ties and had a voice like velvet, clicked through images on a screen. Scans, slides, charts, none of it made a lick of sense to Harlan. He wasn't the type to get wrapped up in diagrams and details. He just wanted the bottom line. "So you're saying it's bad?" Harlan asked flatly. Dr. Anwar's face tightened. He took off his glasses and he folded them neatly. Stage 4. The tumors are in both lungs. There's some that's even spread to the lymph nodes. It's very aggressive. Harlan nodded once, no flinching, just a nod like a man who'd been told the weather was going to be rough tomorrow. "How long?" "Well, with treatment, chemo, immunotherapy, we could possibly extend it to a year. Without, 3 to 6 months. Harlan squinted at the floor like he was reading something written in dust. "And what would that year look like?" "Hard," Anwar said. "We'd be managing symptoms, side effects. You'd be tired, often sick, but it might buy you more time." "I'm not sure that's the kind of time I want," Harlan said. The doctor was quiet for a moment. "I'm so sorry, Harlan." Harlan leaned back slowly in his chair, and he exhaled through his nose. His shoulders, broad and lined from years of labor working in the field, sagged like old porch beams. He scratched his chin, feeling the stubble. It was coarse and gray. "I got a wife," he said. "I married her in 1978. We were high school sweethearts. Her name is Marion. She's still sharp as a tack. You know, she wakes up every morning and makes biscuits from scratch. Real biscuits, not that canned shit." Anwar gave him a small smile. "I can imagine this is going to be pretty hard on her." "Yep," Harlan said. "She don't deserve to see me wither away while changing my diapers. Well, they sat in the silence that follows such truths. Not awkward, but honest. Harlan finally stood, his knees creaking, and he pulled on his old denim jacket. He tucked his appointment papers in the pocket without looking at them. Anwar stood too. There's no wrong choice here, Harlan. We'll support whatever path you decide. Thanks, Harlan said, and he shook the doctor's hand with a grip that still had some bite in it. You got a family? 2 boys, Anwar said. One just turned 8. Harlan nodded again. We'll spend lots of time with them, Doc. Time goes by too damn fast. He walked out of the room without a backward glance. Outside, the wind blew colder than it had that morning. It had come up from the Gulf, carrying the scent of salt and wet oak, and it made Harlan's eyes water, though he wouldn't admit it. He walked slowly to his truck, taking in the rhythm of his boots on the concrete, each step its own small defiance. He got in and he shut the door with a hollow thunk. He sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel like it held the answer to something. The keys dangled from the ignition, but he didn't turn them. He wasn't scared, not exactly. He just didn't like being told how the end was going to come. He had lived a life that was more or less decent. 2 kids, a son who lived in Houston and he worked construction, the other, a daughter who taught 3rd grade in Waco. He hadn't always been the best father. Too many years on the road, too many weekends in the garage or out hunting when he should have been at home. But he was proud of them, and they knew it. At least he hoped they did. He didn't want to die in a hospital bed with bleached sheets pulled up to his chin while strangers whispered over clipboards. No way. If it was up to him, he'd die someplace he loved. Under sky, beside water, somewhere that smelled of cedar and mud and wind. He'd never be one to end it on his own. He wasn't a quitter, and he'd never let that kind of final act be the last memory his wife and kids would have of him. But he needed to go somewhere quiet to think, to let this news wash over him and just sink in. After a long while, he turned the key. He drove out of town with no music, just the sound of the engine and the tires humming on the asphalt. He passed the feed store, the shuttered diner, the place where the high school used to be before they built that new glass building on the west end of town. The past was everywhere, layered like dust. It settled on things and changed their color. At a red light, he saw a young man in a beat-up car at the gas station across the road. His eyes were red-rimmed. The baby seat in the back was empty, but the presence of it, the cracked plastic and stained fabric, hit Harlan with a dull ache. We're all holding something, he thought, all of us. Some just got better at hiding it. He tapped the wheel once with his fingers, then turned onto the highway. He didn't know where he was going yet, but the river wasn't far. The road to the river was narrower than Brent remembered. Weeds clawed at the shoulders like nature trying to take it back. Potholes had opened like old wounds along the way, and every dip and rattle of the suspension sent a dull reminder through the steering wheel. This car, like everything else in life, was hanging on by threads. He hadn't been here in years, not since his father had passed, and even before that it had been rare. But something in him, some unspoken instinct, had tugged him back, like a compass needle drawn to an invisible pole. The Brazos came into view through a break in the trees. It shimmered brown and slow under the weight of the afternoon sun, its muddy skin rippling from the wind and the unseen creatures just beneath. Cottonwoods lined the banks, hunched and noble, their roots like gnarled knuckles dug into the earth. Brent pulled off the road and into a clearing where the grass had been beaten down by tires long ago. He parked, cut the engine, and he sat there for a while, the quiet creeping in like a tide. You just don't notice how loud the world is until it's gone. No notifications, no buzz of street noise or podcasts filling the gaps. Just birds, the wind, and that ancient hush of moving water. He got out and stretched. The air had gotten a bit colder, and the wind had a little bite to it. He donned his jacket and he looked up at the gray sky. It looked like it might rain. He walked down to the edge of the river, stepping carefully over roots and broken branches. He sat on a flat stone worn smooth by time and flood, and he looked out at the slow churn of the water. When he was a boy, this had been a sacred place. His father would take him out here before sunrise while the fog still slept low over the water. They'd bait hooks and sit in Simon's, and Brent had thought his dad was the strongest man in the world. There was no judgment here, no noise, just memories of a father, a son, and the long patience of the river. Now he sat alone, his pockets empty and his stomach in knots. He reached into the cooler he had brought and he pulled out a bottle of water. No beer. He had thought about it, sure, but it didn't feel right. He didn't want to drink. He didn't want to feel numb. He just wanted something to make sense again. He thought of his wife and the soft line between her eyebrows when she worried. She tried not to show it, but he always saw it. She worried about stuff all the time. He remembered her happiness at the prospect of buying the house in Katy, and the thought now of crushing her dreams. Well, that was just too much for him to bear. And Emmy, seeing her face when he walked into her room, God, she looked at him like he was still a hero. How long would it take for that look to turn into disappointment when she figured out her daddy didn't have a job? He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes hard until fireworks of color bloomed into the darkness. He felt shame, not because he'd failed, though it felt that way, but because he had no answers. AI used to be a far-off threat, but now it was real, and he had become one of its first casualties. How could the world not see that it was coming for everybody? No job would be safe. And what kind of world would be left once this technology is fully unleashed? He had done everything right. Gone to college, worked hard, showed up early. But the rules had changed. The game had changed. And no one had handed him the new rule book. He skipped a stone across the water and he watched the ripples fan out, swallowing the impact like it never mattered. What now? He wondered. What the hell does a man do when the world moves on without him? He let his mind drift to simpler things. Caroline laughing barefoot in the kitchen, Emmy asleep on his chest, warm and heavy like a small furnace. Sunday afternoons with a pot of beans on the stove. For a moment, he felt tethered to those memories, like maybe they were anchors instead of weights. The river kept moving as it always did, slow, steady, unhurried. It didn't care about layoffs or inflation or chatbots or eviction notices. It had carved this land for centuries. It would still be here when his car rusted away, when the roof leaked, or when the bills came due. And somehow, that thought gave him something, not hope exactly, but stillness. He didn't have answers, but maybe answers weren't always the point. Behind him, a twig snaps. He turned his head slowly. Just through the brush, a man appeared, older, broad-shouldered. He wore a cowboy hat and a flannel shirt, with a tackle box in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. His face was worn like leather left out in the sun too long. He moved with a limp, but there was a purpose to his gait, a heaviness that seemed more spiritual than physical. Brent gave a small nod, and the man returned it without a word. He watched as the man made his way to a spot down the bank. The old-timer set his rod down and he stared out at the water for a while before doing anything else, like he was greeting an old friend. Brent turned back to the river. The breeze picked up and ran its fingers through the trees. The clouds drifted lazy overhead. The world hadn't stopped for him. It never stopped for anybody. With a grunt, Harlan stepped down from the truck, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other resting on the small of his back. His bones protested the motion, stiff as dry fence posts. The fishing rod leaned against the tailgate, and his tackle box, worn and dented like the rest of him, sat waiting on the truck bed. He stood for a moment, breathing in the river air. The scent of earth and algae and faint wood smoke met him like an old handshake. "Still here," he muttered. The Brazos lay beyond the trees, a ribbon of muddy persistence, cutting through the land like a scar the world had just learned to live with. It was swollen from recent rains, flowing thick and slow, dragging fallen leaves in its current like memories you just couldn't quite shake. He grabbed the rod and tackle box and made his way down the slope, boots kicking up the red dust of Texas earth. He was surprised to see the young man sitting there along the bank. He was hoping he'd have the river to himself. He nodded to him, but he kept on moving. At the edge of the water, he found a crooked cypress whose roots jutted out like elbows. He sat down, careful of the hip that didn't work quite right anymore. He rigged his line with muscle memory, hands still steady even if the rest of him wasn't. The hook glinted once in the sunlight that peered through the clouds before he cast it out with a quiet flick. The line zipped through the air and landed with a soft plop. For a while, he just watched the water. It was doing what it had always done, moving forward, whether you were ready or not. He remembered bringing his kids out here once. They were small then, loud and clumsy, laughing too much to catch anything. His wife had packed sandwiches and wax paper, and the smell of her bread still lingered in his mind, even if he closed his eyes. That had been, God, 30 years ago now? Maybe more. The memories blended, softened by time like river stones. But they were still there, even though they were way down deep. He had worked most of his life, welding in the oil fields, fixing up tractors, even a stint driving long haul when the refinery laid him off in the 90s. He was never rich, but he was never quite broke. The years blurred together like fence posts seen from the window of a fast car. He hadn't made enough time for things, not the way that he should have. He scratched his chin, feeling the stubble rasp beneath his fingers. Cancer. That damn word still didn't feel real. Stage 4. That's what the doc said, like it was a floor in a building that you couldn't climb down from. She had tried to get him to quit smoking for years, but he just never found the desire to. He thought of lighting one up now, but decided not to. Maybe it was time to quit. That thought made him almost laugh out loud. The thought of breaking this news to his wife and seeing her face crushed his spirit. He wasn't ready to deal with that, not yet. Some things were too big to just blurt out. But out here, with only the wind and the river, the idea of his impending death pressed in on him like a great unseen weight. He could feel it in his ribs. Not the fear of dying so much as the sorrow of leaving things unfinished. Too many conversations he failed to have. Too many birthdays he missed because of work. Too many quiet afternoons he could have spent holding her hand instead of working on the damn truck. He looked out across the river, his eyes squinting into the light. The sun had slipped behind the clouds, leaving the world in that soft silver hush that came just before evening. In the distance, a heron stood in the shallows, still as a stone. He sighed, not out of frustration, but out of the kind of tired that just settles deep into your soul. I wasn't much of a father, he whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular, but maybe hoping the trees might hold it for him. Not like I should have been. I worked too hard, I yelled too much. I thought providing was enough. He reached into the tackle box and he pulled out a sandwich his wife had just made for him. Peanut butter and banana on wheat. Just the way he liked it. She still knew. She still remembered. Even when he forgot to say thank you. He bit into it slowly, chewing with reverence. The rod twitched once and his hand moved instinctively to it. But whatever had been nibbling swam off, uninterested. He didn't mind. Fishing had never been about catching, really, not for him. It was about waiting, listening, being still enough to hear the things inside of you, things that you'd spend decades trying not to hear. He glanced down the riverbank and he saw the man still just sitting there, maybe 50 yards off, young, maybe 30 years old. He sat slouched on a rock, staring out over the water like he had lost something and wasn't sure whether to dive in after it or just let it go. Something about the shape of that man's shoulder struck Harlan. There was grief there, or maybe worry, the kind that clings to a man's spine like wet wool. He couldn't see the man's face from this distance, but he didn't need to. He recognized the posture, the slowness of motion, the stillness that came not from peace, but from exhaustion and fear. He had seen it before, in mirrors, in hospital rooms, in truck stop diners where men sat nursing coffee long after the cup ran dry. And yet something about it felt familiar. It was like that young man and him were 2 points on the same map. It's like they were echoes of each other. Different seasons in life, but the same kind of ache. His line drifted and caught in the reeds. Harlan reeled it in and recast without thinking, letting the soft clip of the lure settle into the silence. He didn't know yet why he was paying attention to the stranger. Maybe he wouldn't speak to him at all. Maybe they'd pass each other like wind through branches. But the river had a way of bringing the broken things together. Drifting logs, bits of bark, plastic bottles, and men, especially men. The wind moved softly along the riverbank, sifting through the reeds and rustling the branches of the old pecan trees like an invisible hand brushing back a child's hair. The brazos flowed thick and slow, muddied by rains, bearing leaves and the memories of places upstream, broken twigs, lost lures, and old stories. Brent hadn't moved in some time. He sat on the rounded rock near the water's edge, elbows on knees and eyes lost in the eddies. He thought of his father and how hard he had worked over the years to make sure he and his mom had everything that they would ever need. He wondered if his dad would be disappointed in him now. Caroline's smile was burnt into his mind, the way her eyes shined when she told him of her plan for decorating the living room in the new house, or the way that she breathlessly described the landscaping she wanted to do in the backyard. She had spent hours combing through Facebook Marketplace looking for deals on backyard furniture. Emmy would light up whenever Caroline showed her pictures of what her new bedroom would look like. He had no idea of how to break this news to Caroline. The fact that she would be supportive and accept the news with a smile and then hug him, well, that thought crushed him even more. It only served to prove to himself that he didn't deserve him, that he had failed him. The river didn't give him any answers. That's not why he came here. He came for the stillness. He hoped the current might carry away his panic, his guilt, the scraping ache in his chest that settled there like rust on an old blade. Down the bank, the old man reeled in his line, and he just sat still. Brent had thought he detected a sadness in the man when he saw him earlier. Maybe it was the look in his eyes or the way he walked, as if a huge weight was laying across his shoulders. Now, studying him as he cast his line into the water, he could see that the old man was just as pained as he was. Something was eating at him, something big. Brent turned back to the river and he skipped another rock across the water. He heard the crunching of footsteps and he turned back toward the man. And now the man was walking towards him. Brent looked up, wary. He caught sight of the logo on the man's shirt. First Faith Methodist Church of Richmond. Brent immediately bristled. Great. Here comes the unsolicited sermon. He looked away, hoping the old man would keep moving, but he didn't. Instead, he stopped a few feet from him, and he looked Brent directly into the eye. Brent said nothing. The air felt very heavy. The man didn't speak either. His hands were empty, his fingers twitching slightly at his sides, like they were remembering work that they used to do. He had the look of someone carrying too much pain and too many miles, with no room left in his pockets for either. Brent met his eyes just for a second, and what he saw there stopped the words in his throat. The old man's eyes weren't judgmental. They weren't probing, nor did they feel sorry for him. They were simply knowing. They were an infinite ache. And behind them, Brent recognized it before he could name it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply regarded each other in the gray afternoon light. The river kept on moving. The wind stirred and a hawk cried off in the distance. The sound was lonely and wide. And then the old man, without a word, opened his arms. Brent flinched, not out of fear, but from the sheer unexpectedness of the gesture. He hadn't been hugged in a long time, not like that. Not from another man in an act of friendship. Not from someone who wasn't trying to fix him, but just to hold him. He hesitated. Then he stood slowly, and he knew the old man needed the hug as much as he did. So he stepped into the arms of the stranger. It was a heartfelt embrace. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no sudden breakthroughs, no revelations shouted to the sky. It was just quiet, the kind of quiet that meant something. The old man's arms were strong despite the cancer growing in his chest. His breath smelled faintly of tobacco and coffee. Brent didn't speak. He couldn't. Something in his chest cracked open like the dry earth meeting the rain. They stood that way for a while, two men without answers, without solutions, bound by nothing more than the silent recognition of pain and sorrow in the other and the need to feel comforted. Rain started to fall gently down from the gray sky. And in that moment, each of these men became an angel for the other. One man still young with years of life left ahead of him, and the other very near the end of his. All of heaven was in that embrace. It was as if a legion of angels were present to shower them both with infinite grace. Neither man knew the other's name. It didn't matter. What mattered is that they found each other in their moment of pain within a dark world that couldn't have cared less about them. Neither spoke a word. Words were unnecessary. Eventually, the old man pulled back and he looked at Brent again and he smiled. He patted Brent's shoulder once, firm and real, then turned to walk back down the bank to his spot beneath the cypress tree. Brent watched him go. He watched the way he limped slightly, favoring his right side. He saw the way the man lowered himself onto the root like it was a throne carved for weary kings. The sun peeked through the clouds, then dipped behind the trees to the west, throwing golden light across the surface of the water. The rain had stopped. The current carried the light downstream in ribbons. He breathed, not deeply, not freely, but it wasn't quite as heavy as before. And at that moment, he found that voice inside of him that told him that he'd find a way to make it through this darkness. Some way, somehow, things would be okay.